Welcome to the first session of the inaugural Write Your Magnificent Book webinar series. I'm delighted that you've decided to join me for this journey. Writing is my first love, and I absolutely love the art of mastering language so that I can convey what's in my heart with the world. I'm looking forward to taking you on that journey so that you can share what's in your heart, what's in your knowledge, what's in your life experience with the world as well. So I wanted to welcome you personally, and now we're going to jump straight across to the slideshow, and I'm going to talk you through the very first session, which is about busting the talent myth, overcoming writer's block, and writing powerfully. I have a foolproof formula for how to write powerfully. See you soon. I hope you enjoy this first session. Welcome to the Write Your Magnificent Book keynote presentation. Tips and techniques for aspiring authors, that's you. So live, we go to intros, where I ask you to share your name, the title of your book if you know it, what it's about, what you do and why you've joined this webinar. So I'll have to do that live, face to face. I always like to start with a conversation about talent, because people often come to a writing course with a question in their mind. Am I talented enough? Am I destined to succeed as a writer? And what interests me is the way we speak about talent. We talk about it as if it's a pair of socks or a bag of apples, and either you have it or you don't. But talent belongs to a class of words known as a nominalization. Nominal means existing in name only. It's actually a disguised verb, like relationship or problem. So you notice people say, I have a relationship, but we can't actually have a relationship. It's something that we do. Same with problem. We can't have a problem. It's something we do. You could say we problematize. Likewise with talent. You can't have talent, you do it. So it's not a question of being lucky enough or talented enough. Talent is not a gift of the gods. All talent breaks down to a set of actions and attitudes. So in that case, the important question is, what are the so-called talented people doing? And the principle I'm working from is that if they can do it, I can do it. It's only a question of how, and hows can be learnt. Hope you're smiling. Okay, so I've got a couple of pictures here. We've got an athlete and a businessman. Here's my question. Do you reckon that successful athletes have actions and attitudes in common? If we think about the Olympic level athlete, we know that they do, right? The actions they have in common is they get up and they train when the rest of us are rolling over and going back to sleep, or looking at the rain and saying, I'll stay in where it's comfy by the fire sort of thing. And they have that attitude, they've had the vision perhaps for ages to win, seeing themselves on that podium, being handed the gold medal. They've got the when the going gets tough, the tough get going attitude, all of that sort of thing. There are common actions and attitudes to successful athletes. Likewise with business people, right? They go networking, they're entrepreneurial, they think outside the box perhaps if they're successful in business. They might also have that going gets tough, tough get going kind of attitude, pick themselves up. Entrepreneurs who are successful have been known to fail at their first I can't remember the number, but maybe 7 businesses before they succeed. So there's a pick yourself up, carry on trait that is common to successful people in general. So human performance studies are revealing that there are strategies behind successful performance of any kind. In fact, there are strategies behind any performance. And so there are strategies for succeeding and strategies for failing. There are strategies for blocking oneself when writing and strategies for unblocking, for overcoming writer's block. And that's what I'm going to share with you next. And those strategies effectively are actions and attitudes. But before we go to the writer's block, let me give you some proof about this talent thing, right? So you've heard of the expression 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, right? Not talent, it's application. Dwayne Newcomb is a writer who says, to sell your writing today, you need 90% desire and 10% talent. Dan Millman, who wrote Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which was also made into a film, says, training in gymnastics taught me that elbow grease mattered far more than genetic gifts, that talent was made, not just born. Gustave Flaubert says, he's a French classic author, he says, writing is long patience. Bryce Courtenay, famous Australian author, says, it has been my observation that success is not about being the most brilliant, educated, or talented. It is about being the most determined, about hanging on the longest and never giving up. Marilyn Ferguson wrote a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy many years ago, looking forward to the era we're in now. She observes that talent, once thought to be the province of only a chosen few, is available to all of us if we learn to develop our innate capacities. I was once watching a National Geographic show on the nature of genius, and they said, we all have flashes of genius, the genius acts on them. Anders Ericsson is an author who has made a study of this thing called talent, and he believes that there is no such thing. So he believes there is something instead that he calls deliberate practice. So he says no one is born with genius, not Mozart, not Picasso, not Tolstoy. In any field, world-class achievement demands at least 10,000 hours of practice. And Mozart, who people think of as being born with talent, had already been playing piano some 3,500 hours by the time he was 6 years old. So he was already well on his way to that 10,000 hours. So as far as Anders Ericsson is concerned, this deliberate practice, the studies that he's done, they haven't found anyone who just floated effortlessly to the top of their field and others who were grinds and who worked really hard at something and never succeeded. But there was always a correlation between the amount of application and the amount of success. And this is backed up by neuro studies of the brain, right? So Daniel J. Levitin said neural pathways require repeated stimulation to attain a genius level of mastery. So I'm going to put to you that instead of arguing about whether or not talent exists, consider this. Talent derives from time, application, love. It's about energy, not talent. It's not about magic. It's not about a gift of the gods. It's about loving something enough to stick with it long enough that you get the result. So no excuses in this course. You can't say, I'm not talented enough, I won't buy it. Okay, so the question is just going to be, do you love it enough? And if you don't yet, stick around and learn how to love it. So if we were face to face, I would be checking in with you now and asking, how do you feel about talent now? So share that with me later. And let's jump into this issue of writer's block. So have you experienced writer's block? Have you ever been daunted by a blank page? Have you ever started writing and then been unable to continue, or started multiple times and never seemed to get it right? Many successful writers are plagued by writer's block, and many writers intuitively, unconsciously know how to overcome it and write effortlessly. Some literary professionals argue about whether writer's block exists, but if you get stuck and you stop writing, you're blocked, for whatever reason. But breaking through is easy. So here's my question, how were you taught to write? I'm not talking about handwriting, but expression. Cast your mind back to those first years at school where you were being taught to write little stories and things. What I have found in my 28 years or so of teaching this writing course is that people agree with the following sequence, all right, or the following set of criteria, right? They were given a topic. It might have been something like what I did over the school holidays. They were given brief instructions like that each piece of writing has a beginning and a middle and an end. They were given lined paper and pencil or blue or black pen, and they were sent away to their desk or home to write. So they were on their own writing. They handed it in for correction and received a red mark and a grade that thereafter established their idea of their ability as a writer. So do you relate to that? Most people do. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are. Now the thing is, writing, the word writing with that ing ending, that is the continuous present. So who was sitting with you as you were doing it? How were you sitting? What were you saying to yourself? I worked with one student once when I was tutoring in essay writing, and we took him from a D to an A in one tuition session just by changing the way he sat at his desk. So the how is really, really important. I mean, as you know, How you make dough determines whether the bread rises or falls. How you beat eggs, whether the souffle rises or falls. How you get in a horse, whether you stay on it or you fall off. How is everything. You can know the what, but the how is very important. How you are being is crucial. There's another reason why people experience writer's block, and that is because most of us were taught in a half-brained way. So let me explain. There are two parts to the writing process. The first one is writing, and the second one is rewriting. So we can get quite a wealth of information just from those two words. Writing is all about generating material. This is when we are producing something from nothing, right? Rewriting is when we're taking what's been produced and we're improving it. So, as a writer, you are actually taking the role of a creator. And that's my little coloured jacket that I use in my live classes to demonstrate. So I had to bring it into this webinar as well. So this is you as creator. You're imaginative, intuitive, you have a childlike eye, you're full of wonder, you're an observer of life, you're dreamy, honest, sensitive, aware, you are fresh in your view of things. On the other side, the rewriting, you take on a very different role. This is you as editor. So as an editor, you're objective, decisive, selective, you discriminate, you are focused, you have standards. There are right and wrong ways to do it. There are better and worse ways to do it, okay? Now, the creator is not able to make judgments about quality. It does not have that ability. It just rambles on and on and on and on and on. And the editor is not able to generate material. It can't ramble for nuts. Blank pages frighten the editor. So what causes writer's block? It's the fact that the creator and editor do not understand each other. They speak different languages. So literally, putting the creator and the editor together is like asking a Russian and a Japanese person to have a detailed conversation. They do not comprehend how the other one thinks and speaks, right? Now we can jump across from here just briefly to have a look at some models of the brain. You're all familiar with the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Those models have been in common parlance for a while. So if we think about our creator and editor, which one correlates with which one? I think it's probably pretty quick and easy to see the association between the right hemisphere of the brain and the creator, because the right hemisphere of the brain is the part that processes wholes, colour, symbols, imagery, that sort of thing, and the left hemisphere of the brain processes language, linearity and logic, which is our editor. If we go to another model of the brain, we could look at the conscious and the unconscious. So in this model, the unconscious is clearly the connection with the creator, because where do our ideas come from? But who knows, from the unconscious. Whereas the editor is consciously thinking about and applying principles and making decisions about a piece of work. And then we can look at the model of the adult and the child. Remember I said that the creator has the childlike eye. So the creator is the child in that model, and the editor is the adult that is thinking things through and making those judgments about what's the best way to express something. So if we now go back to the chairs in this image of writer's block, you can see that writer's block is literally a block situation that occurs when we have when we attempt to create and we impose an editor's thinking on a creative process. So the editor literally blocks the creative flow when it intervenes too soon. All right, so you've got the creator coming up with an idea, this great idea, and the editor, that's a dumb idea, who'll be interested in reading that, you idiot, give up now, back in your box, right? So there's too much evaluation coming in too soon and also unkindly, because writer's block also occurs when the editor becomes a critic rather than being merely objective and useful in its suggestions. So I want to tell you a story now, and this is a story that comes from a book called Sophie's World by Jostine Garder, and it's a book about philosophy. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time there was a centipede that was amazingly good at dancing with all 100 legs. All the creatures of the forest gathered to watch every time the centipede danced, and they were all duly impressed by the exquisite dance. But there was one creature that did not like watching the centipede dance, and that was a tortoise. How can I get the centipede to stop dancing, thought the tortoise. He couldn't just say he didn't like the dance, neither could he say he danced better himself. That would obviously be untrue, so he devised a fiendish plan. He sat down and wrote a letter to the centipede. "Oh, incomparable centipede," he wrote, "I am a devoted admirer of your exquisite dancing. I must know how you go about it when you dance. Is it that you lift your left leg number 28 and then your right leg number 39, or do you begin by lifting your right leg number 17 before you lift your left leg number 44? I await your answer in breathless anticipation. Yours truly, Tortoise." When the centipede read the letter, she immediately began to think about what she actually did when she danced. Which leg did she lift first and which leg next? What do you think happened in the end? The centipede never danced again. And that's the way it goes when imagination gets strangled by reasoned deliberation. So we become blocked because we are wondering if our idea is good enough. We assess and evaluate too soon in the process, which ties us up in knots. Creating is a time for dreamy, imaginative, childlike possibility thinking, not for evaluation. So the solution to writer's block is to make an agreement with yourself that the creator goes first and the editor takes a back seat. In my story, in my journey as a writer, I was a prolific writer as a child. I still wrote a lot as a teenager, and then I became blocked in my uni days. In fact, I had about 7 years where I was really blocked, and I would start writing a story and then give up, start another one and not finish it, start and not finish, until I learned to understand this principle about the creator and the editor. And then I made an agreement with myself that I would accept my writing no matter how bad it was in order to have something on paper, because I knew that then I could come back and fix it. But if I didn't have anything, there was nothing to fix. So the editor can contribute to its heart's content later when enough writing has been done. Because remember, the editor can't produce any material. You need the creator for that job. So allow the writing to look and sound awful to begin with, because the editor can fix it later. For now, you just want to get words on the page or the screen. So here's your solution to writer's block. The creator's key to easily flowing writing is an attitude. Remember, we talked about strategies for successful writers, and that there are attitudes and actions, and it's not about talent. So for the creative part of the process, it's about an attitude of trust and acceptance. Now let me just tell you something else, because once I knew this, I started to teach it, and for years I was completely fine with my writing, until in my 30s I hit another period of writer's block. And I was very frustrated because I would tell myself, you're teaching this, how can you be blocked? It's not right. Until I read a book by a writer called Serge Lieberman, and it was a book of stories of people who'd been through the Holocaust. And as I read each story, I was struck by the fact that each story was about different characters in a different situation, but there was a sameness about every story. And it dawned on me that Serge Lieberman was healing himself. Having been through that experience, he was writing about it over and over and over again in order to heal that pain, that painful experience. And then the penny dropped for me, and I realised the reason I was blocked this time in my 30s was not because I was censoring how I was writing and how I was expressing myself, but because I was censoring what I was writing, the content, the material itself, the topic. Because I was writing about personal stuff, and I was writing about stuff that I felt ashamed of in my own life. And so that's why I was blocked the second time. And so I realised that this key, this creator's key, this attitude of trust and acceptance applies to both the how we express ourselves, the process, and the content, the what we write about. Here's another story for you. So this one, as you can see, is about ceramics. And the story goes like this. A ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he was dividing the class into two groups. All those on the left side of the studio would be graded solely on the quantity of work they produced, all those on the right solely on the quality. His procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring in his bathroom scales and weigh the work of the quantity group. 50 pounds of pots rated an A, 40 pounds a B, and so on. Those being graded on quality, however, needed to produce only one pot, albeit a perfect one, to get an A. Well, grading time came and a curious fact emerged. The works of the highest quality were all produced by the group being graded for quantity. It seems that while the quantity group was busily churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group had sat theorising about perfection and in the end had little more to show for their efforts than grandiose theories and a pile of dead clay. This came from a book by David Bales and Ted Orland called Art and Fear, Observations on the Perils and Rewards of Art Making. So it doesn't matter which area of life you're in, whether art, business, ministry, sports, relationships, the only way you can get ahead is to fail early, fail often, and fail forward, as John Maxwell says in Failing Forward. So here you go. The creator is about quantity. Produce, produce, produce. Ramble, ramble, ramble. The editor is about quality. Then have a look at that and apply your knowledge, your wisdom, your skills. So the more productive we are, the more skills we develop rather than tying ourselves up in knots trying to get it right. And that's where you get that image of the writer sitting and typing and then ripping and crunching up page after page out of the typewriter and throwing it into that overflowing waste paper basket because that editor has been talking too soon. Okay, so here's a question. Do we need both creator and editor? Well, I hope you're immediately saying yes, because of course we do. All right. We need ideas and structure. Together, the creator and the editor, the ideas and structure form a partnership. We just need to learn how to have them work together effectively. Right. So first you tune in and then you fine tune. Oops. Here's another story for you. You've seen the film The Karate Kid. So if you haven't, it's a story about a boy called Daniel, teenager, and his mum, his single mum, who move across America for a fresh start because his mother has a new job. And Daniel does not enjoy the new school. He's unhappy about leaving his friends behind, and at this new school he's being bullied by some of the other kids. He is befriended by the caretaker at his new block of flats, a man called Mr. Miyagi, who's a little Japanese man who turns out to be a martial artist. And one day Mr. Miyagi is doing bonsai in his little shed, in his workshop, and Daniel wanders in and he invites Daniel to have a go. So he puts a little plant in front of him, a little tree, and tells him to close his eyes and imagine the tree as he would like it to look, and then to snip to that image. So he puts some scissors in his hands, so just to snip to that image. And Daniel asks, how do I know if the image I get is the right one? And Mr. Miyagi says, it comes from inside you, always the right one. In other words, trust yourself. It comes from inside you, always the right one. So here you go. You're ready to write what might happen. You get going, all good. Or you experience some problems. Perhaps you have too many ideas at once, or you have what is called a blank mind. So let's have a look at those one after the other. So problem number one, the too many ideas at once scenario. So this is actually only a problem because of the way we were taught to write. Remember that lined paper and being taught about beginning and middle and end? And now when you think about what you now know about the creator, is that compatible? It's really not, is it? You know, because the creator has ideas all over the place and it just does not think in a logical, linear manner. So what we need to do for this part of the process, if you're finding that you're having too many ideas at once, is something called clustering or mind mapping. And clustering is where you put your idea in the center of the page like this, and then you just create associations to that idea on branches. And you can easily gather your ideas into like groups, you know, so one branch can all be to do with one idea, and another branch you can start with another idea. And you don't have to have it coming out in the right order. You don't have to have that in beginning, middle, end. You can jump all over the place and come here and go back there and build this idea and then have a new idea. And it completely suits the way that creator thinks. And it's not, you're not being constrained by lines and beginnings and rules and things like that. So clustering is an idea I heard of in a book called Writing the Natural Way by Gabriel Lucerico. And there's another fellow called Tony Buzan, who's very, very famous, who wrote a book about something he calls mind mapping, which is used as a tool in study a lot as well. And this is a similar sort of thing where you put your idea in the centre of the page, and he always uses colour as well, because that appeals to that creative right hemisphere of the brain. And it is possible to create a mind map of a whole hour lecture, for example, or a chapter of a book, and memorise that whole lecture, that whole chapter in a matter of minutes, by comparison with reading through notes and learning it that way, because of the way the brain works and how it works by imagery, it takes pictures. So clustering and mind mapping is just an absolutely brilliant, brilliant tool when you need to organise your ideas, and in a way that works for the creator, when you want to generate ideas and organise those ideas in a way that works for the creator. So I'd like you to have a go. And what I'd like you to do is put the words "my book" in the centre of your page, a blank page, this is not for doing on your computer, and create those associations, those branches all around, and just write whatever comes to you about your book. You know, it might be different ideas for chapters, it might be part of why you're writing the book, you might even have ideas for marketing the book while you're doing this exercise, and it's all okay. So just do a bit of a dump. Pause the presentation here so that you can do that. Take as long as you need to, come back when you're ready. So what I've created here is a bit of a mind map of the material that we've covered so far. So you've got a visual kind of representation of it. So we've talked about two parts to the writing process: writing to generate new material and rewriting to improve existing material. We've looked at the two parts of yourself that carry out this process, you as the creator and you as the editor. We've talked about the creator going first, that agreement you make with yourself, and that the key to creative flow is an attitude of trust and acceptance. And we've looked at the first of three tools, and that is clustering or mind mapping, to enable you to generate that creative flow of ideas. So now let's look at that next problem, which is the problem of the blank mind. And first of all, let's consider the fact that a blank mind sounds negative when we express it like that. So we can always even just reframe that to having a clean slate. But it's actually a trick. It's actually impossible to have a blank mind because the brain works by association. If you've ever tried to meditate, you know what I mean, right? You try and have a blank mind and you can't. Your mind is full of things because ideas latch on to each other one after the other, because it is how our brain works. So what we're experiencing when we have the blank mind is literally overzealous editing. We're just editing so quickly we're not even registering our ideas. So here's solution number 2, or tool number 2, and it's something called free writing or automatic writing. And this is where you start writing and you write continuously. You do not stop, and you incorporate your thoughts. So if you feel like stopping, you write, I feel like stopping, I don't know what to write next, this is boring, I'm getting hungry. Whatever goes through your mind gets incorporated into that piece of writing. So you might understand that when you are writing, there is a flow happening between your mind and your body, between the pen and your brain, right? And when we stop and take that pen off the page, it's like something different happens in the brain. We come out of the flow, we just interrupt the process. So this is an exercise designed to keep you in the flow. I'm going to give you a topic to write on, to write in response to, and as I said, you don't have to stick to the topic. If you end up going somewhere else, that's fine. The most important thing is to just keep writing. So here's your topic. I am writing this book because, and take 5 minutes or so, pause the slideshow now, to take 5 minutes to write about why you're writing the book. What are all your reasons, your purpose, motivation, etc. William Stafford Williams says, writing is like fishing, but I do not wait very long, for there is always a nibble, and this is where receptivity comes in. To get started, I will accept anything that occurs to me. Something always comes along, of course. We can't keep from thinking. So here you've got I think he's a poet, confirming what I've been saying to you, that you don't need to write long because there's something always comes along because it's the way the brain works. And the key to the creative flow, I will accept anything that occurs to me to get started. And here's my quote for you. Ideas are like flies. There's plenty of them hanging around, all right? And so rather than grabbing them and examining them for their legs and their wingspan and whatever, just grab it and run with it. Here's another story. This is the Write a Bad Story story. I have 3 children and my kids were mostly home educated. And one day I asked my girls to write a story and they didn't want to, and they said to me, "We can't write, you're the writer." And I thought, right, I've got to nip that in the bud. So I gave them the instruction to write a bad story. I said, I want you to write the worst story you've ever written, all right? And for the next 3 days, they wrote solidly. And they loved it. And why is this? It'll be obvious to you by now that because we have removed all those constraints from the editor and we've just given permission to be in the creative zone of trust and acceptance. So give yourself permission to write bad. Okay, and that will allow the flow. You can always fix it later because you do know how to fix it. But if you try to fix it too soon, you can just damn the flow. There's an author called Kate Grenville who has a student who would go off and clean the bath whenever she experienced writer's block, you know. And so Kate Grenville told her to do a piece of free writing about cleaning the bath, and that cleared the block. Julie Cameron is an author who recommends writing what she calls 3 morning pages. So she says that as soon as you open your eyes in the morning, you grab your notebook, you sit up and you start writing, because what that does is it allows, because you are still connected, because of the sleepy, dreamy state, you're still connected to the unconscious, so you let that creative flow happen really easily, okay? She also says that often when we start writing, there is some junky, sort of whiny writing that comes out first. And she says that is like a plug on top of the good stuff. So the more that you practice this just trust and acceptance, the sooner you more reliably channel the good stuff. Okay, so here's our mind map again with the second tool, free writing or automatic writing, added into it. Now, tool number 3 is something called a writing marathon. And I read about this in a book called Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. And what Natalie Goldberg does is she would gather together a group of writer friends in a cafe and they'd set themselves a topic and everybody would write on that topic for half an hour and then they'd stop and they'd read and they would all share what they'd written, but there was no evaluation allowed. So after someone finishes reading, everyone else just says thank you. Then the next person reads and everyone says thank you. And then the next person reads and everyone says thank you. Now, the beauty of that is that the writer does not, before they're about to read, justify, oh, this is really terrible, I couldn't get into it, and I feel anxious about reading it. None of that. There's no pre-ramble, all right? You just start reading. So you're actually trusting and accepting your ideas as they're coming into your mind as you write them, and you're trusting and accepting your ideas as they go out of your mouth as you read them aloud. On the listening side, there's no immediate rush to reassure the reader by saying, oh, that was good. Instead, it's just thank you. All right? It's a very clear process. Read, thank you, read, thank you. Now, if we were in the live webinar, we would do this. And so we'll do that when we're in a live webinar together. But right now, we won't be able to. And we obviously wouldn't be writing for half an hour. We'd be writing for just a few minutes and then doing a read and saying thank you, writing and reading. And the topic that... there we go. Give you the instructions I've just shared. And the topic that I would be giving you for this exercise, or that I did give in that first session, is how I feel about reading my writing aloud to strangers or to others. So have a write of that anyway, because it might be that when we're in the webinar next, we can share those pieces. How I feel about reading my writing aloud to strangers. So pause now and take just a few minutes to write that in response to that. And when we read, I would be reiterating the rules, right? No evaluation, accepting your ideas as you read them aloud, just as you did when you wrote them. Thank you response only, no justification, no reassurance. Okay. So the key to successful creating is an attitude of trust and acceptance. And I hope now you're gathering that therefore encouraging self-talk is crucial. It is the X factor of easily flowing writing. So genius only flows when the creator feels welcome and free. Now again, if we were face-to-face in the webinar, I'd be asking you, what have you found most useful so far? And if you can jot that down and email me feedback, I'm really appreciative of that. So here we go. There's our mind map. We've got now our 3 tools: clustering, free writing, and the writing marathon. So the writing marathon obviously is not something you do on your own. It's something that you can do if you gather together with some others, sharing sort of modality or context. So now the question, we're going to jump over to the editor side of the page. And what is the key? The creator's key is an attitude. What is the key for the editor? But before we answer that question, we have another question. What is good writing? So what do you think? I have 3 tests of good writing. Before I share them, take a moment to think, what to you, if you've been reading something that you finished, you said, that was a fabulous book. Why was it fabulous? What did it do? What was inspiring for you? Was it the characters that were interesting? Was it the situation, the plot that was fascinating? Was it the twists and turns and surprises? Was it the beauty of the language that was used? Was it the feelings it generated in you? All of these things are part of good writing. My tests are these 3. One is that the writing creates a world that is more real than the world we're physically in. So I reckon a book is great when I have lost track of the world I'm in and I'm caught up in the world of the story. I'm absolutely captivated. To me, that's one of my tests. Another test is that good writing is like a clear glass window. And so you can imagine when you look through a very clear glass window, you don't notice the glass, you are in the scene, which is why often people walk into brand new glass doors and things. So you're just really in the scene on the other side. Whereas when you're looking through a window that's got scratches and smears on it, you notice the glass. So the analogy I'm using here is that the window is the writing itself. So when the writing is really beautiful and flows beautifully and is seamless, we don't notice the way the words and sentences are formed. We are just in what is being said and described, right? Whereas when the writing's a bit clunky, our attention stops at the glass. It stops at the words, at the language, and we notice it, and it sort of pops us out of the world of the story. My 3rd test for good writing is that it stays with you. It has an impact. It creates an impression that's lasting. So there are some books that I've read that, even years later, I have the feeling from that book still, or I have memories from that book, images, or even just the memory that I loved it. So here's why it matters. You can have the best idea in the world, but will you communicate it well, right? And you each have a book to write, and you've got some really brilliant ideas, I am sure, something very important to communicate. So it's very important that you communicate it well. So just as we found there was one attitude that underlies the flow of writing for the creator, for the editor there's one called principle governing good writing. And that is the old writer's adage, show, don't tell. So suppose I want to communicate the idea that a character is excited. I have a choice. I can tell the reader, she was excited by my news, or I can show the reader. She leaned forward, eyes shining, hanging on to every word I said. Which style is more impactful? I'm certainly hoping that you're agreeing with me that it is the showing style. Now, why is showing more powerful? Because a picture tells 1,000 words, all right? And because telling is flat, static, parental, bossy, judgmental, general, right? The reader is a passive recipient. Whereas showing paints a specific picture and invites us to discover things for ourselves. The reader is an active participant. They engage with that picture. Telling is facts, showing is story. If I were to ask you, what do you prefer, to go to a lecture or to go to a show or watch a movie, I'm imagining most of you are going to agree that you would prefer the movie. Some people in my classes tell me, the lecture, and I'll tell them in response that I'll say, is that because the lecturer tells stories, that they share anecdotes, that brings the lecture to life? And most people agree that that's the case, because the story is the thing that really engages us, right? And partly that's because images are so old and primal, Even movies, if you think about a movie, it's 80% imagery and only 20% words. They aim to show everything through they aim to convey all of the information through images rather than through dialogue, or as much as possible. So how do we show? There were 3 tools that make showing super easy. So here's our mind map again with our key, which is show, don't tell. And here we're heading toward the first tool, all right? So life does not stand still. It's dynamic. There is constant movement and change. And this is tool number 1, show through action. So I'd like you to have a go at converting these telling statements into showing statements. So if, for example, we had the sentence, he was angry, or she was angry, you could convert that one, instead of telling us she's angry, have her face redden, have her lean forward and slap him across the face, right? Like those actions show us instead of telling us, all right? If someone is tall, you can say he ducked as he entered the room. So instead of telling us he's tall, you've shown us. So with these 3 examples, have a go at translating them into just one sentence each, from those 3 words into one sentence, and make sure that you don't use the words nervous, kind, or beautiful day. Make sure you're showing through action. So pause the slideshow now in order to do that. And you can use any examples of your own. You can do excited, angry, sad, pretty, tall, short, anything, ugly, doesn't matter. So once you've written those, I'm pretty certain that you have written something that is much more alive and interesting than she was impatient or nervous or sad or whatever it was, right? And what we can observe from this is that writing skill is not about talent. It is an expression of your ability to observe and to describe what you are observing. Okay, so there's our mind map again with the tool show through action. And now let's go to the second tool. So here's a question for you. How do we experience the world? How do we know that we're here? And people are usually a bit perplexed when I first present this question until somebody says, our senses. And that's exactly right. Tool number 2 is to show through the senses. We know we're here because we smell, see, hear, touch the world around us, right? So what I would like you to do now is to create a cluster of your forthcoming book launch event, 1 branch per sense. So you write the book launch in the centre of the page and then create a branch for everything you see at the book launch, everything you hear, everything you smell, everything you feel, everything you taste. Right, so here we have our mind map again with the first tool we've looked at, show through action. So now let's have a look at number 2. How do we experience the world? How do we know we are here? When I ask this question in my writing classes, people are often perplexed until someone says, I know, our senses. And that's right. We know we're here because we can see, hear, smell, feel, taste, touch the world around us. So this is really important, okay? This is tool number 2, show through the senses. And it's very, very important because if you want to draw the reader into the world of your story, you want to appeal to their senses. For example, talking about the character's onion-smelling hands. And an interesting fact about the brain is that we physiologically go through the experience we're reading about in order to understand. So if you're writing about a character who's running, at a very, very subtle level, your body is triggering the muscles and so forth that run in order to understand what you're reading. And it's too subtle for you to necessarily experience that. But if you want proof for this, let me ask you, have you ever salivated when reading a menu? If you've had that experience, you will know that there is such a thing called a mind-body loop. So the body is responding to what the mind is doing. Same when you suck on a lemon, you imagine sucking on a lemon, it can already give you that puckering sort of sour taste in the mouth and the puckering sensation. There's actually a whole industry that relies on the fact that there is this mind-body loop and that when we read something, we have a physical response. And that is the industry of erotica and pornography. So when you write, if you want to write powerfully, you want to appeal to the reader's senses, okay? So here's an exercise for you to do, and that is to create a cluster or mind map of your forthcoming book launch event when you've written your book. And I'd like you to write one branch per sense, right? So one branch about what you will see at this book launch event, what you will hear, another branch what you will smell, what you will feel, what you will taste, right? So 5 branches, and off those branches, all the little details that relate to what you will experience sensorily at your book launch. So pause the slideshow now. Just take 5 minutes to do a quick mind map or cluster of your book launch. The second part of the exercise is to write a few short descriptive sentences in present tense describing this event. So I want you to use all your senses except the visual. So I'll explain why when we reconnect in the webinar, why not to use the visual. So I want you to put the visuals into your mind map, but when you come to write the piece, don't include the visuals, just the other 4 senses. And make sure you write this description in present tense as if it's happening now. Now here's a little tip, don't begin I can hear for each of those branches of your senses, instead jump straight into describing what you hear. So people around me are laughing and chatting, glasses are clinking as champagne is poured, etc., etc. And you conjure up this event your way and to describe the event as you would like it to happen. So again, stop the slideshow now, take 5 minutes or so and just write that description. Or you can take as long as you like, you can take half an hour if you like. And then when we're in the live webinar, we'll hear some of them and celebrate with you about you will pre-celebrate your book launch, or else we'll put them into our Facebook group and read them and celebrate there. Okay, so here's our mind map again of the course so far. And we've got our second tool, show through senses, listed there on the editor's side of the page. So here's the next, I'm about to give you the third tool. How do we inspire the reader to care about our characters, places, story and message? Follow along with me here. A woman is sitting in the bus. Your response to that might be, so what? There are lots of women sitting in the bus, who cares? A woman is sitting in the bus biting her nails. We've zoomed in a little more closely on her, and it's a little more interesting. A woman is sitting in the bus biting her nails and thinking about the fight she had last night with her boyfriend. Now, I reckon that's much more interesting, do you? So what is it that makes that sentence more interesting than the first one? This is tool number 3, show through detail. So the more detail that we offer, that we provide in our writing, the more we hook hook the reader, we draw the reader into what we're writing about. Let's just assume, let me present a scenario to you. What would prevent a dictator like Hitler from pointing to a city on this map and saying, bomb that one? What would stop him from doing that? So here's the answer, it's details. You see, while the city is just a dot on the map and he has no personal connection with it, a dictator can easily say, bomb that one. It's just a dot and a population number. But when he has walked along those city streets, he's fallen in love with a woman beside the river, he's eaten soup at a kitchen table, he's seen the place in all its seasons, then he cares about the city and he'll protect it. He'll say you can bomb that one, that one, that one, but don't touch this one. The details convey uniqueness. They make us care about your story and the people and places in it. Generalizations are distancing, the details bring us close. So have a go. This is the exercise for the tool of the details. Sitting in a room, what makes this room unique? What is this room's fingerprint or signature? So I want you to find 10 specific details really fast. Just list them. You're not doing this as a piece of writing, just as a list, bullet points. So they might be scratched initials, the photo, the mask, the bowl of nuts, etc. Whatever it is in the room that you're in, any room at all. And when I teach this in my class, I give everyone a toilet roll. I hand them a toilet roll and ask them to look through the toilet roll to narrow their focus to find those details. So have a go at that. Just pause the slideshow now to find those details, just a few minutes. So here's our mind map review, our visual representation of the whole journey so far. And we've got our 3 tools for the editor's side now. Our principle is show, don't tell. And we've got 3 ways of applying that: show through action, through senses, and through specific details. So what is the difference between a masterful writer and a mediocre writer? The mediocre writer takes shortcuts and uses general labels for rich experiences. On the other hand, a masterful writer takes the time to honour the detail and bring the story to life. You'll notice that something like "he was angry" is 3 words. That's what I actually call lazy writing. It's shortcut writing. Whereas if you go to the trouble of talking about the reddening face and the slap and the etc., if you paint that picture, you are taking the time to honour the detail and bring the story to life. So a mediocre writer tells by giving facts and summaries. He woke up is a fact or a summary. The masterful writer shows how. How did he wake up? Someone was pulling at his sleeve and calling, "Dad, Dad." He opened his eyes to see his son beaming and covered in chocolate. So we've got the action of pulling and calling and opening and beaming, and we've got the picture of the sleeve and the chocolate and the sun. If I ask you to consider which word is inside show, you'll immediately see the word how, and that is your tool, your clue, your tip. If you show how, you'll always write well. You will naturally be showing through action, senses, and details. So remember, it is not about talent. It is about the ability to observe. So when do we use telling language? We'll use it for speed, when the details don't matter, when we want those shortcuts, when the generalizations are fine, when uniqueness isn't required. Now, let's just apply these principles to marketing. So in marketing literature, showing means benefits, not features. So features are those dry facts. It's static. It's telling the customer, this phone offers 213 advantages. Benefits are the actions and experiences that bring your point to life. Call the people you love and talk to them anytime face-to-face. Send links, video, audio, take notes, record conversations. So that's all about action, and it's all about bringing it to life. So here's another application. You might be describing a client who has a business dream but is fearful and skeptical. That's just telling us some facts. Or you might create a little picture of this client watching other entrepreneurs burst into the world and her heart just bursting with eagerness to leave her job and run her own business, but she's plagued by doubts. So these details and this imagery that comes with this greater sense of story is much more engaging than just the fact. So have a go at this now yourself. Write a telling statement about you or a client in your profession, or a product or a service you offer. Just facts, telling, boring. Then convert it into showing language by incorporating action, senses, and details. I rushed ahead for a moment then. So pause the slideshow so that you can do that, and then rejoin. So writing mastery shows up when the writer takes the time to paint a scene with action, senses, and details. And then you have what I've called self-esteem. When you work with yourself as a team, you will experience self-esteem, all right? And then also you're able to write on command. You don't need to wait for the muse anymore, because when you can speak to yourself encouragingly, you can produce that inspiration at any time. So here's our view of the whole session today in a mind map, all right? We've got our two forms of writing, our two aspects of ourselves, which goes first, the key for each that supports each side of the equation, the three tools for each side. Remember that tools in a toolbox, no one uses all of their tools. They use the ones that work for them. So whether you use clustering or free writing or a writing marathon is entirely up to you. You might never need them, but they're available to you if you do. On the other hand, on the editor's side of things, I would highly recommend you always use those three tools, because they really do make the difference from mediocre to masterful writing. And there's your self-esteem outcome. So here's my question. What have you found most useful so far in this course, in this first session from the 4-week webinar? Send me an email, let me know. Final little comments I want to make. This tree-like picture is the brain, the nervous system. So intelligence relates more to how many pathways are in the brain than to how many brain cells we have. How well networked up your brain is the X factor to intelligence and also intuition, because as you can imagine, looking at this, ideas can leap around through a highly networked brain much more easily than if you just have a few well-travelled, roads or highways through your brain. And that's what happens in the brain when we're very habitual. We do the same thing over and over, and we have nothing new, no new thoughts, no new behaviours. So the more you generate newness in your life, the more you stimulate learning and you stimulate this growth of connections in the brain. So in a writing course that I'm running, which is live, and everyone's physically in the same room. I mean, you're live, I know, but when we're all physically in the same room together, then I'll usually ask people per session to shift seats so they have a new perspective, a new spatial perspective on the content, so that they are layering the material in their brain in new and different ways, rather than always seeing from one perspective in that classroom. We can't do that here necessarily, although you can always sit in different rooms as you go through the slideshow and the webinar. But what I would encourage you to do is to do the other exercise I offer, which is to create a shift in temporal perspective. And that is, I want you to do a writing exercise that assumes you are now finished writing your book. And I want you to describe how you feel, what you've learnt along the way, what doors are opening up for you now, and to write as if you have the finished book in your hands, but to write the whole thing in present tense as if it's happening now. All right, so my book has just arrived from the printer. It looks fabulous. I'm feeling so excited and grateful, something like that, but in your own words. So if you can take some time now to describe how wonderful you're feeling with your finished book in your hands. Summary of the session. Talent is not about talent in the traditional sense of the word. It's about time, application, love. It's about energy, not talent. You overcome writer's block by doing the two parts separately. The creator goes first, and it's assisted by an attitude of trust and acceptance and 3 tools. The editor goes second, and it's assisted by the added show, don't tell. It focuses on the how. I have one last writing exercise for you. This is a writing course after all. And I would like you to take your notebook into a crowded place and describe what you observe around you. Show, don't tell, right? Show through action, senses, detail. And write in present tense because you're describing what happens as it happens, right? The man at the table next to you is frowning. The coffee smells divine. Whatever it is that's happening around you, describe it in present tense and get as much detail as you can. So that means you're not going to tell us that someone is angry. How do you know? What you're going to do instead of interpreting is describe. So you're going to say, he's frowning, he's reddening, he's balling his hand into a fist, right? So whatever it is that is happening around you, show it through action, senses, and detail. This is the exercise I tell my writing students. Of all the exercise I will give them over a 6-week course, for example, this is the one that is not optional. This is the one I want everybody to do. And it applies to you as well. I really want you to do this one. Because honing our ability to observe is where good writing actually comes from. It's not a mysterious gift of talent. So one more request for feedback. I'd love to know what worked for you about this first session, what didn't work, how could it be improved if you send me an email. Feedback to Liliane at lilianegrace.com. And coming up, how to structure your book and your time, language tips and traps in the 3rd session, and an overview of the publishing industry and your options in the 4th session. Thank you. Well, we're done. That was the first session of the Write Your Magnificent Book webinar series. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found lots in there that was useful and helpful to you in writing your book and getting a great creative flow, freeing yourself from any myths of talent, and learning the distinctions that will guarantee that you produce powerful writing. Please do the exercises. They really will help you get your book on its way. And next week, we'll go into the 2nd session around structuring your time and structuring your book. So have a good look at that and have more writing time, and we'll be honing in on this book so that very soon it's done, dusted, and you're at that book launch celebrating. See you soon.